Hello, everyone. My name is Moises Esparza. I'm the exhibitions manager for the San Diego Latino Film Festival. Thank you so much for joining us during our 27th edition, brought to you virtually via the Eventive platform. We were originally supposed to bring you all of our programming during an in-person event back in March, but we had to postpone it due to the pandemic. And I'm just really thrilled to be able to bring you all of our programming directly to the safety of your own homes, which is the most important thing. If you're joining today for this post-screening discussion of the First Rainbow Coalition, you can send us comments via the Eventive platform. Just type them out and we'll copy and paste them over here and throw them on screen for our special guest, Ray, to answer their questions or to acknowledge their comments. You can do the same thing via our social media platforms on the Media Arts Center San Diego. Type out any questions or comments you have for Ray, and I'll make sure that they go on screen so that Ray can address them. Let's introduce our very special guest, Ray Santisteban, director of the First Rainbow Coalition. Ray, how are you?
Great. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this discussion.
Yeah, it's really a thrill because your documentary, I think, is more timely than ever, I think, given the state of the nation. What is your entry point into the Rainbow Coalition? Like, what got you interested in this topic? Has it been a culmination of your past work? Yeah, tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this project.
Well, that's really been it. It is a culmination of all the films I worked on before. Back in 1990, when I was just coming out of college, I worked on a film called Passing It On, which was about one of the members of the Black Panthers that was falsely incarcerated. That film was on POV back in 1993. But while working on that film, I saw some footage of a meeting that was happening in Chicago between one of the Black Panthers and a group of white activists. I didn't know who those people were, those white activists, but I noticed they were wearing Confederate flags, the battle flags. And I was like, what is this? Who are these people? And it was kind of this question that lingered. Because it was a verite film, there's no explanation. It's just the scene unfolds and there's not a setup, there's not a wind down of it. But many years later, I was at a conference and I came across someone that was talking more about this Rainbow Coalition. And I realized that was what that footage was. And that began this journey of trying to get this film made. It took 12 years to get it funded and produced. And going back to your first comment about it being timely, is when we began, the notes coming back from the funders were, well, this is an interesting film, but what does that have to do with today? This is 12 years ago.
Oh my God.
And then over time, after a couple of years, 5 or 10, 6 years, they were like, man, this film is kind of interesting. It's touching on issues today. And about 4 years ago, they're like, man, this is a really timely film. So that's when we got funded. The film did not change. It was always the same idea, always the same story that we were telling, but the times changed. The times caught up with the story we were trying to tell.
Well, I think the times catching up is also a bit of a theme in your film, in particular to this Confederacy symbol that was used by the young patriots, and that's addressed pretty head on in your documentary. And the film kind of culminates with a differentiation between perhaps what that symbol meant to someone in the young patriots versus how it's being used now by the far right. Tell me a little bit about that dialogue that occurs in your film.
Yeah, it's an interesting issue. I mean, our generation has certain feelings about that flag, but at that time, I think within the activist communities, they recognized it, but I think the members of the coalition understood that the young patriots were using it just as a way to initiate dialogue within members of their own community. So as in the film, one of the characters, Hy Thurman, says, we used to wear the Confederate flag with a Free Huey or a Black Panther button. So people would walk up and say, well, why are you wearing that button with the Confederate? And then that would allow the window for them to begin talking. And then they would start telling about their politics. And so it was a sort of a way to begin discussions. I don't believe that could happen today. It's a different time. But at that time, it was still a little, I don't know, it was just a different time where people were willing to accept things that would not be acceptable today. And one of the things I've said about even this coalition, it broke so many barriers and broke so much ground that if it happened today, I don't know if it could happen today, but if it did happen today, it would still be a cutting edge vanguard movement within the United States if it happened today. So that just shows how far ahead it was in terms of what they were trying to do, getting Southerners with Latinos, with the Black Panther Party.
Absolutely. And what's so amazing about this documentary, beyond the scope of the story it tells, is all of the archival footage that's included in the film, which comprises up a substantial amount of the time. You say it took you 12 years to get it done. Tell me about every time I talk to a documentarian, I become more and more fascinated by the archival search process. So if you can maybe talk a little bit about that.
It was. It started off easy in a sense because there's the film that I saw in 1990 called American Revolution 2 that had that scene. So part of it was to contact the director of that film, Michael Gray, and to make sure that we had access to use that footage. Without that footage, we would not have a film. So that was really the most important. And he also directed another film called The Murder of Fred Hampton. So two different films by the same group of filmmakers. So those two were integral, and that was the base of our film. But then we began looking through network footage, and we began finding photographs that hadn't been seen in 50 years. And that was one of the good things, because the 50-year anniversary of the coalition was last year. Newspapers were writing articles about the 50th anniversaries. They were finding new photographs that hadn't been released from their archives. So they kind of did a little bit of the work for us at the very end. We're like, oh, these are, because one of the unfortunate things is that, for example, a newspaper in Chicago, I think the Daily News, I'm not sure if that's the exact name, they have an archive, but you cannot research it. They will only allow you to use photographs that they've recently published, because then they know where it is. Like if you said, oh, let me use a photograph from 2 years ago, they're like, well, we don't know where the photograph is. So it's not archived properly. But because articles were coming out then, we'd call them that week. You just ran an article. Can we get those photographs? Can we use them? So that helped at the very end. But I love doing archival research. We had a great archive producer, Suzanne Mason, that helped us out. So between the two of us, we were able to really bring a lot of new material that people haven't seen in 50 years. And it adds an important layer to telling the story. The challenge was to bring people back to Chicago in 1969. What did it look like? What did it feel like? You know, what did it smell like? Just kind of like try to make it tangible. Because that reality is where this movement came out of, this kind of gritty urban setting where the poor white community is poor just like the Latino community is, and just like the Black community is. And that was one of the things that brought them together, is this sort of poverty, the police brutality, the lack of housing, and we show that. And so people can try to get them to understand that, hey, if I were in that same position back then, I could understand how a coalition like this could exist, because you want people to really not just tell them that this coalition came about because of politics. It was really because people had tried everything else. They had tried mainstream politics. They had tried urban organizing. But the Black Panther Party came up with an analysis that was international, saying we are part of an international struggle of poor people trying to, get our fair share of what the societies have to offer. And that drew in all the member groups. They were able to connect with that. They were able to use that philosophy to help improve their communities.
Yeah, and then beyond the archival footage, there's obviously the interviews that you make and include, or that you filmed with members who are still alive from each movement. Tell me a little bit about how you approached them with this project and what their contribution meant for the documentary.
Well, each of the main characters is just integral. I mean, those voices really have not been heard. Even someone like Chacha Jimenez, from the founder of the Young Lords, he's not in a lot of films, but he's really, that movement is probably the primary grassroots movement in the Puerto Rican community from 1970 to 1975. It's one of the most important movements in Puerto Rican history. So I think each of them sort of brought us into their community, and they helped explain what their community was going through. My contact with Chacha Jimenez goes back to about 1991. Again, just coming out of college. So he was the first one I met. He's the one that gave me a tour of Chicago. He began telling me about all of this, but I knew so little, I didn't understand it. And I know that sounds weird, but when you say Rainbow Coalition, I was thinking Jesse Jackson in 1983. He ran for president on the Rainbow Coalition platform. It took years for me to understand that they had their Rainbow Coalition in 1969, years before. And then Jesse Jackson, in many ways, borrowed. Yeah, I don't know what the term you want to use is, but he took a lot of what that analysis was of the rainbow, and he formed his own movement out of that. And one of the other critical voices is Bob Lee in the film. He's someone, again, who was there at this meeting. He was, one of the influential people that helped get this coalition off the ground, but you don't see him in any documentaries. And it's just, in some ways, it's a tragic, because he's so smart, and he was so, he just has so much to give in terms of knowledge of grassroots organizing. And Hy Thurman from Young Patriots, it took 2 years to contact him, because this is the hard part. Just imagine someone's calling him, he doesn't know me, and I'm saying, I want to talk to you about your being in Young Patriots. And there's kind of like a post-traumatic stress syndrome happening with a lot of activists because of what happened. I mean, people are getting killed, people are getting jailed. And so when strangers are calling, it's very difficult for them to just pick up and chat about difficult times. And so it took years to develop those relationships. So in some ways, the fact that it took 12 years helped me, because it allowed me to strengthen the trust level with the characters. And I think that helped give us really honest responses, and hopefully, just let people get a gist of that spirit from which the Rainbow Coalition sprang.
So you have the archival footage, you have the participation of core members, we have the story, the real events that occurred. I guess guide me a little bit through how you envision this happening in your film as a documentarian. What do you think your job truly is as a documentarian, putting this story together?
Well, I think it's a lot of different things, but first and foremost, I think it's storytelling. It's got to be a story that people want to listen to, and that's what good stories are. If it goes back to, if you're sitting around a campfire and someone's telling a story, you can either do it just your voice and be a great storyteller, or you can use all these other accoutrements, camera and archives and interviews and music. And that's what our job was, is to try to tell that story. And the second responsibility is to be truthful. One of the key things we wanted to do is, since this story is so little known, we wanted to make a film that would stand up. Like 5 years from now, I don't want someone saying, oh, well, that wasn't true. What Ray put in the film, that didn't happen. So I really wanted to make sure I was only conveying information that like a journalist, I would confirm. So there's certain things that I had heard that could have happened, but because I couldn't confirm it, I didn't put it in the film. I was really trying to create a historical record that could be built upon by other people, other historians or authors, or other people could revisit this as a starting point for research, because it was so difficult for me as a filmmaker, because there is no book about the Rainbow Coalition. If there had been, it would have saved me years of research, because I was really coming at it without a lot of sources.
We mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, we mentioned how topical this all is. I guess in terms of impact, what sort of impact do you hope this documentary has on people who may not know much about the first Rainbow Coalition? When I first saw the documentary, fully admit that I did not know the story, to be honest. And in preparing for this Q&A, I rewatched it, and the impact that it had in the first time I saw it was significant, but with everything that's gone on this year, it just seems to have magnified. So talk a little bit about impact and what you hope it leaves people with.
Well, there's, I think, a couple of things that I really want people to take away. And part of it is the response you had. We know that not a lot of people know about this. So to me, it was important just to let people know that this existed, this happened. And there were people that at that time that were willing to get outside of their safety zones as activists, as people from a specific community, and take a leap of faith that they can work with other communities. A lot of times I think sometimes we shut ourselves off. It's safer to be with our own people and organize. These people were willing to jump outside of that. And I think that's something to be magnified, to be celebrated. In terms of the possibilities, I think they're short and long term. Because of where we are now, I think it provides an instant way to talk about these issues. What's happening now with George Floyd and the people getting killed and brutalized in the Black community and in our own community was happening back then. And so there's strategies that people can do that to help confront that. And I think doing it together makes us stronger than doing it separate. And when I say us, I mean our communities. And I think that's one of the examples. And then the long term, what I hope is people do the research and read more about each of these movements. There's books coming out. I think in the last 3 years, there's been 3 or 4 books that have chapters that deal with the Young Lords, the Young Patriots, more about the Black Panther. And I think that's the real thing, because the analysis was complex. The challenges were great. And our film kind of touches on it. It's a survey in a lot of ways. But I think that history is so rich, and it's unfolding. And if you're a young Puerto Rican, a young Latino activist, I think you need to know about the Young Lords and what they were able to do. And again, we're talking about people that are working without funding, they're making money selling newspapers, okay, 25 cents or 5 cents, whatever it was. And they're living together because they don't have jobs. Their job is working with the Black Panthers, or their job is working with the Young Lords. So would that happen today? I don't know. People can't do that today, right? I mean, what group do you know that's out there just living together, like communally, so you can do activism? It's a different time. So I just think it's interesting to learn about that and to see this through line of activism with our community. When you look at, what was it, years ago when they had the Occupy movement? The Young Lords were occupying churches in the 70s. It was the same idea. It was a tactic. Okay, if we want to get people to respond, let's take over the place that they control, or their headquarters. So it's just interesting to see how change can happen, and how it's usually young people at the forefront of these movements. And when you get older, it just, I don't know of any movements today where the older people are the cutting edge of those movements. The younger people always represent, I think, best the hopes and dreams of the generation that they are part of.
Yeah, this is not a question, this is just a general question. I almost feel like I wish more white individuals would watch this film, particularly those who claim ignorance against how police has affected and brutalized communities of color, because white individuals were also brutalized by police in Chicago, as depicted in your documentary, and they were also segregated and living in poverty and didn't have access to housing. So I think this is just a personal observation. The power of your documentary is that it has people who are blind or unexposed. They'll have an entry point into these larger discussions that are going on today, maybe.
No, I agree. And actually, you said it better than I did. I was trying to say that it's an entree point. It's a way to begin the investigation of those times, or to begin looking at those times. The issues are race-based. The issues are class-based. And in some ways they intersect, in some ways they don't. But in that poor white community, I mean, they had accents. They were dressed like rural people. They wore cowboy hats. They had these Confederate flags, and the Chicago police hated them. Most of those police officers are Irish, they're Polish, they're German, the traditional groups that are police, and they just hated these Southern white folks, and they got brutalized. And we didn't go into it, but some people were. There was like a dirty cop at the time, and he was involved in a lot of bad stuff. And there's accusations that he killed people. But again, because I couldn't prove it, I didn't put it in there. But there's accusations, and we do know that police station in that uptown area where the poor white community lived, 3 years later, there was a massive arrest of police officers. It was like a place where the police would break into houses, take the stuff, and sell it. So I don't know what you call that. It's called a Somerdale police station. It was a huge, made the newspapers and all this. It was a corrupt police area, that whole area. And so that's what the Young Patriots were saying. And it was proved, but it was later. It was like 3 or 4 years down the line. And a lot of people got fired. A lot of people got arrested. But anyway, we didn't go into that in the film. But it's just one of the other things that I thought was extremely significant was that we had an interview. It's not in the film because we couldn't. We had a longer version we couldn't afford. But there's a Chicago police officer being interviewed, and he was found out to be the Grand Wizard of the KKK in Illinois. And when they found out, they fired him. And so it was like a mainstream network, like NBC, saying, "Hey, how many KKK are in Illinois?" He's like, 10,000. He's like, "How many KKK are in Chicago?" He's like, 5,000. It's like, so you had KKK members that are in the Chicago police force. And I first found out about it. One of the interviews we did is there was a former Chicago police officer, and he said that the FBI had raided their police station, and they found 3 KKK hoods in the lockers. And when he told me that, I thought he was lying. I said, "Oh, I'm not gonna, he's made it up." But then I found out later this other story in NBC News. I mean, it just goes deeper and deeper. The extent of the racism, the extent of the white supremacist movements in Chicago.
Obviously the wonderful thing about the documentary is its promotion of unification among these groups, and starting with the Black Panthers, the slogan "All Power to the People," and you get to see through this documentary how they truly advocated for this being a reality. I guess, have you heard, beyond the people who you interviewed for this piece, have you heard from different members of the Black Panthers movement or the Young Lords or the Young Patriots? Like, what are their interpretation of events after they see the documentary? I'm talking about people you did not interview for this piece, but who associated with those parties, if you know.
I've been getting a very positive response from people that were in those movements. For example, I'm in discussions with screening the film at a Black Panther film festival that's run by former members of the Black Panthers. So people, they like the history because, again, I'm not pushing any agenda. I'm just telling the story. And one of the members from New York told me of the Black Panthers was that they knew about the Rainbow Coalition, but they didn't know how it happened. And so they're learning themselves through the film, like how it actually came to be. They knew Fred Hampton was there. They knew there was a coalition. But to see, okay, this happened, Chacha did this, that's the part that nobody's really told. And that's the part that the film says. And so at a certain point, if you're an activist, you can say, okay, it's not really some grand strategy and plan. It just happened with a person doing this, a person doing that. Next thing you know, there's 3 groups and you have a coalition. So it was more organic the way it grew as opposed to a grand strategy of activism. But we do know, and we do say in the film, that it was the policy of the Black Panthers to have coalitions. And it was a policy of the Black Panthers to be allied with other people internationally that were involved with revolutionary ideas. It was a huge experiment, the revolutionary experiment that the Black Panthers were the vanguard of. And it was happening everywhere. It was happening in Prague. It was happening in France. It was happening in Mexico. all over the world, there was that generation of the 60s is grappling with these ideas, and how do you change the world? How do we transform it? And the backdrop, of course, is the Vietnam War and all these, the Eastern Europe is being transformed with the Soviets invading, and people are going up against that. So as Chacha Menes says, the world was on fire and we were part of the flame. And I think that's a really powerful statement, because they were part of this. They felt it too. They were part of something larger than just the Lincoln Park area of Chicago, the uptown area of Chicago, the south and west side of Chicago. They felt like they were part of these worldwide efforts to make a better world.
You said your job was to tell the story, to tell the truth. If you maybe can take a step back and consider your role as a filmmaker, would you label yourself a political filmmaker or a political documentarian? Or in terms of labels, which one would you most likely attribute to your style of documentaries?
I just call myself a documentary filmmaker. I love politics, and I especially love grassroots politics. So I've worked on about 5 films about that. But I also love poetry, and I love doing films about art. So I have a range, but those are probably it. Politics, art, culture. I mean, but I just say documentary because there's so many interesting things in the world. If I find something interesting and I think I can add something to that topic, I'll make a film about it. So, and because politics is so difficult, and I always feel like I can tell a story, but it's not my role to explain the politics of it. So even now, I'm explaining my interpretation of the events and the people, but I leave it up to the activists to talk about the politics.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I also hope the activists see this and then they learn from it and use it to further their own movements. Because like you said, it's about the young people who are leading these movements. So I hope they learn a lot from the documentary and they incorporate what they see for tools of their own for their party's mission, which I think is really substantial and valuable. Also to understand, the giants whose shoulders are now standing upon, which I think is a really important part of activism, is understanding history, understanding leaders, and taking what they did and what they've learned, making it your own, and using it to progress. I don't know.
No, I absolutely agree. And to tell you the truth, in terms of that history, it is the challenge of those movements to tell that history. It hasn't been told. The fact that it took 50 years to have a film about the Rainbow Coalition, I mean, I'm always astounded by that, because to me that is a major movement within the history of the 60s, within the history of the United States, within the history of the Black community, the Puerto Rican community, and the Southern white community. So I think at its very base, I think that that's one of the lessons, that we have to tell our own history. And of course, I navigated a sort of a strange line, because I'm a Chicano, but I'm making a film about largely Puerto Ricans and Black community and the Southern white, and I'm not members of those communities. So it was a little weird, because I know there's movements now within the documentary field, like nothing about us without us. And I think, especially for these communities that have been marginalized and haven't had a chance to tell their history, there's a backlash against outsiders coming in and telling the history. And in some ways, I think it's a valid critique, because so often outsiders will come in and they use the history for their own purposes. Because I know that, I really try not to do that. I just try to be honest with it. When you look at it, it's really a simple story I tell. I just go, this, and this happened. And at the end, we have a little bit about what it meant, but we really didn't want to tell people what to think. We wanted to show them what happened and let them decide what it meant. Let them, maybe they'll go this way with it. Maybe they'll think this about it. And I think that's the good part of a film like this, is that it's a mirror to what you think the significance of it is. And I like that. I like that when the audience is engaged, when I'm not telling them what they need to take away from the film. I try to stay away from that.
I find these conversations so valuable, because what you just mentioned, this idea of nothing about us without us, is something that came up in another discussion that I was a part of during this festival. they called it extractive filmmaking, where people go in, film,
That's it.
and then peace out.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of advocacy, which I admire and I celebrate, which is about community and embracing the people whose stories you're telling in every step of the process, which I think is a really powerful tool to highlighting these voices who may in many cases be perhaps unheard. Well, Ray, do you have any parting words? We've reached our allotted time. This has been a great discussion. Maybe tell us a little bit about where people can find the film if they're just tuning in and didn't watch the movie, and then maybe what other projects do you have on the horizon?
There's the film is streaming at the PBS website for a year up until February 2021. So if you missed it, you want to check it out, it's there. Tell your friends about it. We want more people to see it. And I have some things I'm working on, but I don't know if I could talk about it. Like one of them, they're gonna announce it like in a week, and I want it. It's just a little short film, but I want people to know about it, but I don't think we're supposed to talk about it. But I'm busy and I'm doing stuff. But I got to tell you, I do not want to work in any more films that take 12 years to make. I can't.
How long did the short take? How long did the short take to make?
About 8 months. 8 months. But it was start and stop and waiting, and stuff. And the COVID hit. So it was supposed to launch a while ago, and then the launch got, because it was like, people were going to work, so how could you launch the film? I mean, the people at the outlet, so.
So we'll stay tuned. Where can people find more information about your upcoming projects? Do you have a website or social media?
I haven't launched yet. Oh God, I'm so bad. But I would say Good Docs, and I think a bunch of your films in the festival are represented by Good Docs. That's my educational distributor. They know to get a hold of me. And we're trying to screen it in educational places and colleges. We want to continue the dialogue. And I guess that's my parting message is just, keep talking about this issue of race. It's ongoing. It's happening now. That's what people are in the streets. We don't talk about it here in this country. And our own communities need to talk about it. We need to talk about it with the Black community. We need to engage the white community. And we need to come up with our own answers. I don't know if the answers are going to come from the government, Our own communities need to come up with our own answers.
That's true. Yeah, they're not going to come from the police either. So it has to come from our communities. Absolutely. Ray, well, it's been a joy. Thank you so much for your time, for letting us screen the film. All the best to you on your future projects. And I wish you nothing but success with the launch of this short film. I can't wait to hear more about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your insightful questions. And thank you for this festival. I mean, you guys do such great work. And I know it's hard and difficult for everybody. And so I appreciate everything you've done.
Well, these conversations definitely make it worth it. So thank you.
Take care.
Okay, we'll be in touch. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.